In 1945, a group of captured German women were taken to a prison camp run by the United States, expecting punishment and starvation. After all, in devastated Germany, even civilians survived on crumbs. But when they entered the cafeteria, they saw trays full of meat, white bread, and even dessert. One of them, incredulous, whispered, "They eat like this during war." At that moment, they realized that the enemy they imagined to be cruel lived in unimaginable abundance, and that the real difference between defeat and victory lay not only in weapons, but in the way a country treated even its prisoners. Berlin, 1945. Smoke rises from the skeletal remains of what once stood as the proud capital of the Third Reich. Through the rubble-strewn streets, figures move like ghosts, their hollow eyes scanning the ground for anything edible. A woman clutches a moldy potato to her chest as if it were gold. Children fight over scraps of bread that would have been thrown to dogs just years before. In a bombed-out hospital, Greta Muller tends to patients with supplies that ran out weeks ago. Her nurse's uniform hangs loose on her diminished frame. She tears strips from her own undergarments to bandage wounds, knowing that each piece of fabric might be the difference between life and death. Her hands shake not from fear, but from hunger that has become a constant companion. The sound of boots echoes through the corridor. American soldiers appear in the doorway, their uniforms clean, their faces well-fed. Greta raises her hands, expecting the worst. Instead, the sergeant offers her a chocolate bar. She stares at it in disbelief, unable to comprehend such abundance in the hands of the enemy. Across the city, Ingrid Weber emerges from the ruins of the munitions factory, where she had worked 16-hour shifts on a diet of watery soup and sawdust bread. The propaganda posters still clinging to broken walls promise victory, but the reality around her speaks only of defeat. When the American soldiers find her, she spits at their feet, her loyalty to the Reich unbroken, despite the evidence of its failure surrounding her. Margaret Fisher sits among the wreckage of her communications unit, radio equipment scattered like broken dreams. At 35, she has seen enough war to know that ideology means nothing to the dead. When the Americans approach, she simply stands and walks toward them, her hands already raised in surrender. She has no fight left, only the bitter knowledge that everything she believed was built on lies. The journey across the Atlantic passes in a blur of seasickness and uncertainty. The three women, strangers thrown together by circumstance, huddle in the ship's hold with dozens of other captured German personnel. The American guards distribute food that seems impossibly rich compared to their recent diet. Even the ship's rations surpass anything they had eaten in months. Greta watches a young American sailor casually discard half a sandwich, and the sight fills her with a rage she cannot fully understand. In Berlin, her 8-year-old daughter Anna waits in a bombed-out apartment, surviving on potato peels and hope. The abundance these Americans take for granted could save her child's life, yet here it is, thrown away without thought. Ingrid refuses the offered food, convinced it is poisoned or part of some elaborate psychological torture. She whispers to the other prisoners about American cruelty, about the camps where Germans are starved and beaten. Her words find fertile ground among those desperate to maintain their beliefs in the face of contradictory evidence. Margaret accepts the food without comment, eating mechanically while observing the Americans with calculating eyes. She notices how they joke with each other, how they share their cigarettes, how they treat the prisoners with a casual indifference that lacks the cruelty she had been taught to expect. It troubles her more than outright hostility would have. The ship docks at New York Harbor, and the prisoners catch their first glimpse of America. The city rises before them, untouched by war, its lights blazing in defiance of any blackout. Even from the harbor, they can see abundance everywhere. Cars moving freely, people walking without fear, buildings standing tall and proud. It is a vision of a world that continued to live while theirs died. The train journey westward reveals more of this impossible reality. Through the windows, they see farms heavy with crops, cattle grazing in endless pastures, towns where children play in streets unmarked by bombs. American soldiers on the train share their rations freely, offering coffee and sandwiches to prisoners who stare in bewilderment at such casual generosity. Greta presses her face to the window, watching the landscape roll past. Every mile takes her further from her daughter, but also deeper into a revelation she is not ready to accept. This is the enemy homeland, yet it looks like paradise compared to the wasteland Germany has become. The cognitive dissonance threatens to shatter everything she thought she knew about the war. The prisoner of war camp appears on the horizon like a mirage. Clean barracks arranged in orderly rows, surrounded by fences that seem almost decorative compared to the brutal barriers they had expected. American guards wave casually as the train pulls into the station, their weapons held loosely, their posture relaxed. There are no snarling dogs, no shouting officers, no atmosphere of terror. As they disembark, Sergeant Robert Johnson approaches the group with a clipboard and a tired smile. He has been processing prisoners for months, and the routine has become almost mundane. These German women look no different from the others, frightened, defiant, confused. He assigns them to Barracks C with the same efficiency he might use to sort mail. The barracks are spartanly furnished but clean. Each prisoner receives a cot with actual sheets, a blanket that smells of soap rather than death, and a small locker for personal belongings. Greta runs her fingers over the smooth cotton, remembering when such simple luxuries were commonplace in her life. Now they seem impossibly extravagant. That first night, whispered conversations fill the darkness. Some prisoners share rumors about American brutality, about medical experiments and forced labor. Others speak of the food they saw the guards eating, of the casual abundance that seems to permeate everything American. Fear and hope war in equal measure as they try to prepare for whatever tomorrow might bring. Ingrid lies awake, her stomach cramping with hunger she refuses to acknowledge. She has convinced herself that accepting American food would be a betrayal of everything she fought for. Better to starve with honor than to live as a traitor. The propaganda that shaped her youth whispers in her ear, warning her that comfort is just another weapon in the enemy's arsenal. Margaret stares at the ceiling, her mind working through the implications of what she has already seen. The Americans could have packed them into cattle cars, could have fed them scraps, could have treated them with the same brutality that German forces showed to their prisoners. Instead, they provide basic dignity and comfort. The question that haunts her is simple: why? Morning comes with the sound of a bell rather than shouted orders. The prisoners are told to form lines for breakfast, and they shuffle toward the mess hall with the resignation of those expecting the worst. The building ahead looks ordinary, even welcoming, with windows that let in natural light and doors that stand open rather than barred shut. Greta reaches the entrance first, and what she sees stops her cold. Long tables covered with white cloth stretch across the room. American soldiers sit at some, eating and talking casually, but it is not their presence that shocks her. It is what lies on the serving tables along the wall. Steam rises from metal containers filled with food that seems too good to be real. She approaches slowly, as if walking toward a mirage that might disappear at any moment. The first container holds scrambled eggs, fluffy and yellow, more eggs than she has seen in months. Next to it sits a tray of bacon, the strips crispy and glistening with fat. Fresh bread, sliced thick and still warm from the oven, fills another container. There is butter, real butter, not the ersatz spread they had grown accustomed to in Germany, but it is the sight of fresh milk, white and creamy in tall pitchers, that nearly brings her to her knees. In Berlin, milk has been a memory for over a year. Children cry for it in their sleep, and mothers weep because they cannot provide it. Yet here it sits, abundant and casual, as if such plenty were the most natural thing in the world. Ingrid appears beside her, and Greta hears her sharp intake of breath. For a moment, the young woman's ideological armor cracks, revealing the hungry girl beneath. Then she steps back, shaking her head. "It's a trick," she whispers in German. "They want us to become soft, to forget who we are." Margaret joins them, her experienced eyes taking in not just the food but the entire scene. American soldiers move through the line with easy familiarity, loading their plates without thought or rationing. They take what they want, leave what they don't, and seem utterly unconscious of the abundance surrounding them. To them, this is simply breakfast. A young American private notices their hesitation and approaches with a smile. "First time through the line?" he asks in broken German. "Don't be shy, ladies. Take what you want. There's plenty more where that came from." His words are meant to be reassuring, but they hit the German women like physical blows. Plenty more. The phrase echoes in Greta's mind as she accepts a plate from another soldier. Her hands tremble as she moves through the line, each server adding portions that would have fed her family for days back home. A thick slice of ham lands on her plate, followed by eggs that glisten with butter. Fresh fruit, actual fresh fruit, fills a small bowl that someone places beside her plate. She finds a table and sits in stunned silence, staring at the meal before her. The last letter from her daughter spoke of eating grass soup and being grateful for it. Anna's words dance through her memory. "Mama, I dreamed about bread last night. Real bread with butter. Do you think they have bread in heaven?" The first bite of eggs nearly overwhelms her. The richness, the flavor, the simple satisfaction of eating real food after months of starvation rations. It is almost too much to bear. Tears stream down her face as she chews, and she cannot tell if they come from relief or guilt. Across the table, Ingrid sits with her plate untouched, her face a mask of stubborn resistance. "They're trying to buy us," she mutters. "Make us forget our loyalty with their decadent food." But even as she speaks, her eyes linger on the fresh bread, and her throat works as she swallows saliva. Margaret eats methodically, her face revealing nothing of the turmoil within. Each bite confirms what she has begun to suspect. They have been fighting a war against an enemy that possesses not just superior weapons, but superior civilization. The abundance around her is not the result of theft or oppression. It is the natural product of a society that has never known the kind of desperation that drove Germany to war. An American sergeant approaches their table, his manner casual and unthreatening. "How's the food, ladies?" he asks in careful German. Cook's pretty proud of his scrambled eggs. Been making them the same way for 20 years. He seems genuinely interested in their opinion, as if their comfort actually matters to him. Greta looks up at him through her tears, and the words escape before she can stop them. They eat like this during war? The question hangs in the air, heavy with implications that go far beyond simple curiosity about American dining habits. The sergeant's expression grows thoughtful. "Well, I suppose we do. War's hard enough without going hungry if you don't have to." He pauses, studying their faces. "You ladies been having a rough time of it over there, haven't you?" The simple acknowledgement of their suffering coming from an enemy soldier breaks something inside Greta. She nods, unable to speak, while fresh tears course down her cheeks. This man, this American who should hate her, looks at her with something approaching compassion. Over the following days, the routine of camp life establishes itself with surprising gentleness. The prisoners are assigned work details: laundry, kitchen duty, grounds maintenance. But the labor is reasonable and the treatment fair. No one is beaten for working slowly. No one is denied food for minor infractions. The casual humanity of their captors becomes increasingly difficult to reconcile with everything they had been taught about American brutality. Greta finds herself assigned to the camp infirmary, where her nursing skills are welcomed by the American medical staff. The supplies available astound her: real bandages, actual medicines, equipment that functions properly. She works alongside American medics who treat German prisoners with the same care they would show their own wounded. The cognitive dissonance grows stronger each day. In the infirmary, she watches American doctors save the life of a German prisoner who had tried to escape. They work with skill and dedication, using precious medical supplies without hesitation. When the man recovers, he weeps not from pain, but from confusion at being treated with such care by those he had been taught to see as monsters. Ingrid maintains her resistance, but it grows more difficult with each passing meal. She takes only bread and water, refusing the meat and dairy that her body craves. The other prisoners watch her growing thinner, her defiance slowly consuming her from within. Some admire her loyalty. Others see it as pointless self-destruction. The breaking point comes during her second week in camp. Ingrid collapses during morning formation, her body finally rebelling against the starvation she has imposed upon herself. As she falls, her carefully maintained facade crumbles, revealing the frightened young woman beneath the ideological armor. Greta rushes to her side, cradling the younger woman's head as American medics arrive with a stretcher. "Don't let them poison me," Ingrid whispers weakly. "Promise me you won't let them make me betray everything." In the infirmary, Greta sits beside Ingrid's bed, watching glucose drip into her veins through an IV line. The American doctor explains that she is severely malnourished and dehydrated, that her body is beginning to shut down from lack of proper nutrition. He speaks with professional concern, showing no anger toward a prisoner who has rejected his country's hospitality. When Ingrid awakens, her eyes are clearer but filled with confusion. Why? She asks weakly. Why are they helping me? I'm their enemy. Greta has no answer. She has been asking herself the same question for days, watching American soldiers share their cigarettes with German prisoners, seeing guards help elderly captives with their work assignments, witnessing a level of basic human decency that contradicts everything she thought she knew about their captors. That evening, a letter arrives for Greta. The envelope bears the familiar handwriting of her neighbor in Berlin, and her heart races with hope for news of her daughter. But as she reads the carefully worded message, her world collapses around her. Anna is dead, claimed by the starvation and disease that stalk the ruins of Germany like hungry wolves. The letter describes her daughter's final days, the desperate search for food, the gradual weakening, the quiet death in a bombed-out apartment, while her mother was an ocean away, eating American abundance. The neighbor's words are gentle but clear. Anna died calling for her mother, died hungry in a city where even the rats have learned to starve. Greta's scream echoes through the barracks, a sound of pure anguish that brings prisoners and guards running. She clutches the letter to her chest, her body racked with sobs that seem to tear her apart from within. The American soldiers stand helplessly by, their faces reflecting genuine concern for her pain. Sergeant Johnson approaches carefully, his voice soft with sympathy. "Bad news from home?" he asks in his careful German. When Greta nods, unable to speak, he sits beside her on the bunk. "I lost my boy in the Pacific," he says quietly, 19 years old. "Sometimes I think the war takes the best of us first." The shared grief creates a moment of connection that transcends nationality and ideology. Here is an American soldier, mourning his son while comforting the enemy mother who mourns her daughter. The absurdity and tragedy of war crystallize in this simple human exchange. That night, Greta cannot eat. She sits in the mess hall, staring at a plate of food that could have saved her daughter's life. The abundance that once amazed her now feels like mockery, each bite a betrayal of Anna's memory. Around her, other prisoners eat with growing acceptance, but she cannot join them in this simple act of survival. Margarete sits across from her, understanding without words what has happened. "The guilt will eat you alive if you let it," she says quietly. "I've seen it happen to others. You cannot save her by starving yourself. She died while I ate their food," Greta whispers. "While I marveled at their abundance, my child was dying of hunger. What kind of mother does that make me?" "A human one," Margaret replies. "One who was given no choice in the matter. Do you think she would want you to die too? Would that honor her memory or simply add to the waste this war has created?" The conversation is interrupted by a commotion near the kitchen. Ingrid has appeared, supported by 2 other prisoners, her face pale but determined. She moves slowly through the serving line, accepting portions of food she has refused for weeks. Her hands shake as she carries the plate to their table, and tears stream down her face as she takes her first real bite in days. "I can't fight anymore," she says between bites. "I don't understand this place, these people. They should hate us, should make us suffer. Instead, they feed us better than our own government ever did. I don't know what to believe anymore." The 3 women sit together in the growing darkness, each grappling with the collapse of their certainties. The war that once seemed so clear, so righteous, now appears as a complex tragedy where the lines between good and evil blur beyond recognition. They are prisoners, but they are treated with dignity. They are enemies, but they are shown compassion. Greta finally begins to eat, each bite a small act of rebellion against the guilt that threatens to consume her. "Anna would want me to live," she says quietly. "She always said I was too stubborn to die easily. Maybe that stubbornness is all I have left." As the weeks pass, the routine of camp life becomes almost comfortable. The prisoners work, eat, and sleep in conditions that surpass anything they experienced in wartime Germany. Some begin to learn English from their guards, who seem genuinely interested in teaching them. Others write letters home, describing their treatment in terms that their families will surely find impossible to believe. The transformation is gradual, but undeniable. Faces that arrived gaunt and hollow begin to fill out with proper nutrition. Eyes that once held only fear and defiance now show curiosity and even occasional laughter. The prisoners are becoming human again, recovering not just their physical health, but their capacity for hope. Greta throws herself into her work in the infirmary, finding purpose in caring for others, as she could not care for her daughter. The American medical staff welcomes her expertise, treating her as a colleague rather than a prisoner. She begins to see that healing transcends nationality, that the impulse to preserve life is universal among those who choose to serve it. One afternoon, while organizing medical supplies, she overhears two American doctors discussing a shortage of morphine. The wounded from the Pacific Theater require more pain medication than anticipated, and supplies are running low. Without hesitation, she approaches them with a suggestion for a substitute treatment she learned during the siege of Berlin. The doctors listen with interest and respect, implementing her suggestion with gratitude. Later, one of them thanks her personally. "You probably saved a lot of boys from unnecessary pain," he says. "That's good medicine, no matter what uniform you wear." The comment stays with her long after the doctor has gone. Good medicine, no matter what uniform you wear. It is a philosophy that seems to permeate American thinking, this idea that human value transcends political boundaries. She wonders if this is what true civilization looks like, the ability to see humanity in one's enemies. Ingrid's recovery is slower, but equally profound. She begins to help in the kitchen, working alongside American cooks who teach her their techniques with patient good humor. The abundance of ingredients amazes her daily. Fresh vegetables, quality meat, spices she had forgotten existed. She learns to make American dishes, marveling at recipes that assume plenty rather than scarcity. One evening, while preparing dinner, she asks the head cook why Americans eat so well even during wartime. He scratches his head thoughtfully before answering. "Well, I reckon it's because we can. Got the farms, got the factories, got the ships to bring it all together. Seems wrong to go hungry when you don't have to." The simplicity of his answer reveals a fundamental difference in worldview. Americans eat well not because they are greedy or wasteful, but because their system produces abundance naturally. They have built a society where plenty is the norm rather than the exception, where even prisoners of war eat better than many free citizens in other nations. Margaret observes these changes with the analytical mind that made her valuable in communications work. She sees the systematic nature of American generosity, the way it flows from institutional policy rather than individual whim. This is not random kindness but organized compassion, built into the very structure of how Americans conduct war. She begins to understand that this treatment of prisoners is not weakness but strength. A nation confident in its values can afford to be generous to its enemies. A society secure in its superiority does not need to prove it through cruelty. The Americans feed their prisoners well because they can, because it costs them little, and because it demonstrates the very civilization they fight to preserve. The revelation is both humbling and terrifying. If America possesses this kind of moral confidence, this casual abundance, then Germany's defeat was inevitable from the beginning. They were not just outgunned and outnumbered. They were fighting against a fundamentally superior way of organizing human society. Spring arrives at the camp with a gentleness that seems impossible after the harsh winters of wartime Germany. Flowers bloom in carefully tended gardens maintained by prisoner work details. The American guards organize baseball games, teaching German prisoners the rules of a sport that embodies their casual approach to competition. Serious, but not deadly. Competitive, but not cruel. Greta watches these games with fascination, seeing in them a microcosm of American character. Players argue with umpires but accept their decisions. Winners celebrate without humiliating losers. The game has rules that everyone follows, but the atmosphere remains relaxed and friendly. It is competition without hatred, victory without vengeance. One afternoon, Sergeant Johnson approaches her as she tends to injured players in the makeshift medical station beside the field. "You ever play sports back home?" he asks, settling beside her on the bench. "Not like this," she replies, watching a German prisoner high-five an American guard after making a good play. "Our games were more serious, More about proving superiority than having fun. Johnson nods thoughtfully. Yeah, I've heard that. Seems like a lot of pressure to put on a game. Here we figure if you're not having fun, what's the point? The conversation reveals another layer of the cultural divide that separates their worlds. Americans play for enjoyment. Germans played for ideology. Americans compete to test themselves. Germans competed to prove their worth. Even in recreation, the two societies reflect fundamentally different values. As summer deepens, news from Europe becomes increasingly grim for the German prisoners. Cities fall, armies surrender. The Reich crumbles with accelerating speed. Some prisoners receive letters from home describing devastation beyond imagination. Entire cities reduced to rubble, populations scattered like leaves in the wind, a civilization collapsing under the weight of its own ambitions. Yet here in this American camp, life continues with almost surreal normalcy. The prisoners eat 3 meals a day, work at reasonable tasks, receive medical care when needed, and sleep in clean beds under secure roofs. The contrast between their fate and that of their countrymen creates a complex mixture of guilt and gratitude that few can fully process. Ingrid struggles particularly with this contradiction. Letters from her family describe near-starvation conditions in their bombed-out town, while she gains weight on American rations. How can I write to them about this? She asks Greta one evening. How can I tell them that the enemy feeds me better than the fatherland ever did? The question has no easy answer. The truth would sound like betrayal to those still suffering under the collapsing Nazi regime. Yet lies feel like a betrayal of the Americans who have shown such unexpected humanity. The prisoners find themselves caught between loyalties, unable to fully embrace either their past or their present. Margaret faces the dilemma with characteristic directness. In her letters home, she writes carefully coded messages that hint at her treatment without explicitly describing it. She speaks of adequate conditions and fair treatment, words that convey safety without revealing the full extent of American generosity. It is a compromise that satisfies neither complete honesty nor complete loyalty, but it allows her to maintain connections with both worlds. The end comes suddenly, as endings often do in wartime. News of Germany's surrender reaches the camp on a warm May afternoon, delivered by guards whose faces show relief rather than triumph. The war is over, they announce, and repatriation will begin soon. The prisoners should prepare to return home. But what is home to women who have spent months discovering that everything they believed about their enemies was wrong? Greta stares at the letter, informing her of processing for return to Germany, and feels only emptiness. Anna is dead, Berlin is ruins, and she has learned truths that will make her a stranger in her own land. That evening, the camp holds a farewell dinner, a gesture that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of their captivity. American guards and German prisoners sit together at long tables, sharing food and conversation in a mixture of languages that somehow conveys meaning despite linguistic barriers. The atmosphere is subdued but warm, marked by the complex emotions of people who have found unexpected humanity in each other. Sergeant Johnson approaches Greta during the meal, carrying a small wrapped package. "Thought you might want this," he says, placing it beside her plate. Inside, she finds a photograph, herself working in the infirmary, surrounded by American medical staff and German patients, everyone focused on the work of healing. "Figured you might want to remember that good medicine doesn't have a nationality," he says with a gentle smile. "You helped a lot of people here. That matters, no matter what uniform anyone was wearing." The gift moves her to tears, not just for its thoughtfulness but for what it represents. In this photograph, she sees herself not as a prisoner or an enemy, but as a healer working alongside others who share her commitment to preserving life. It is an identity that transcends the political categories that brought her here. Ingrid receives a cookbook from the kitchen staff, filled with American recipes adapted for German ingredients. "So you can remember how to make plenty out of a little," the head cook explains. "Figured you might need that skill back home." The practical kindness of the gift embodies the American approach to generosity. Helpful, unpretentious, and focused on real needs. Margaret's farewell gift comes from the camp commander himself, a letter of recommendation praising her work ethic and character. "Might help when you're looking for work back home," he explains. "Good people are good people, regardless of which side they fought on. The letter represents a kind of moral rehabilitation, an official recognition that she is more than her wartime allegiances. The night before departure, the three women sit together in their barracks, surrounded by the small possessions they have accumulated during their captivity. The space that once felt like a prison now seems like a sanctuary, a place where they discovered truths about themselves and their former enemies that will reshape the rest of their lives. "I don't know how to go back," Ingrid admits quietly. "How do I live in a world where I know the enemy was more civilized than we were? How do I face people who still believe the lies we were told?" Greta considers the question carefully before answering. "Maybe we don't go back to the world we left. Maybe we help build a new one based on what we've learned here. Anna died because of hatred and ideology. Maybe her death means something if it helps us choose differently." Margaret nods slowly. "The Americans didn't have to treat us well. They chose to, because that's who they are. Maybe we can choose to be different too, to carry this lesson forward instead of burying it with our shame." The conversation continues through the night, three women grappling with the weight of knowledge that will make them forever different from those who did not share their experience. They have seen the face of true civilization, and it looked nothing like what they expected. Now they must decide what to do with that knowledge. Morning brings the buses that will take them to the port for repatriation. As they board, many prisoners look back at the camp with expressions of genuine regret. This place of captivity has become a place of revelation, where enemies became human beings and hatred dissolved in the face of consistent kindness. The journey home reverses their earlier passage, but the women who board the ship bear little resemblance to the frightened prisoners who arrived months earlier. They are healthier, calmer, and burdened with knowledge that will set them apart from their countrymen. They carry with them not just personal belongings, but a new understanding of what civilization can look like when it chooses compassion over cruelty. As the ship pulls away from American shores, Greta stands at the rail, watching the coastline fade into the distance. In her pocket, she carries the photograph from Sergeant Johnson and the last letter from her daughter, two documents that represent the tragedy and hope of her experience. Anna is gone, but the lesson of her death, that hatred destroys while compassion preserves, will live on. The return to Germany confirms their worst fears and best hopes. The country they left no longer exists, replaced by a landscape of physical and moral ruins. But in that devastation, they find opportunities to plant seeds of the wisdom they gained in captivity. Greta works with relief organizations, treating former enemies with the same care she learned to give in the American camp. Ingrid opens a small restaurant, serving food that reflects both German traditions and American abundance. Margaret becomes a translator for the occupation forces, helping to bridge the gap between former enemies. Years later, when historians ask them about their experience as prisoners of war, they struggle to convey the full impact of their captivity. How do you explain that imprisonment became liberation? How do you describe the moment when enemies revealed themselves as human beings? How do you communicate the transformative power of unexpected kindness? But they try, because the lesson is too important to lose. In a world still learning to choose between hatred and hope, their story stands as testimony to the power of treating even enemies with dignity. They learn that civilization is not about superior weapons or dominant ideologies, but about the daily choice to see humanity in those who might have reason to hate you. The abundance they encountered in that American camp was not just material but moral. It was the abundance of a society confident enough in its values to extend generosity even to its enemies. It was the abundance of people who understood that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to preserve and heal. In the end, they discovered that the most powerful weapon in any war is not the one that kills, but the one that transforms. They entered that camp as enemies and left as witnesses to the possibility of a better world. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest times, humanity can triumph over hatred, one act of unexpected kindness at a time. The war ended, but the lesson lived on. Sometimes the greatest victory is not won on the battlefield, but in the quiet grace of choosing compassion over vengeance, abundance over scarcity, hope over despair. In a Texas prison camp, 3 German women learned what America really was, and in learning that, they discovered what they themselves could become. If this story of unexpected humanity in the darkest of times moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more untold stories from history that will challenge everything you thought you knew about war, compassion, and the human spirit. Hit that like button if you believe these stories of reconciliation and hope deserve to be heard, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your perspective about someone you considered an enemy? Your engagement helps us bring these powerful, forgotten stories to light and ensures that the lessons of history continue to inspire future generations. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story that proves humanity can triumph even in the most impossible circumstances.